Well, good morning, everyone. I just want to say before Darius falls asleep back in the production booth, um, I've been doing this now for 7 years on Princess, a year on Holland America. And Darius, I've never had anybody who's quite as good at doing this as you are. So thank you very much. Really. He knows how to do the computer business. He's got it nailed. So thanks a lot, man. Okay, good morning, everyone. This morning, I want to look ahead a little bit to our visit in Ecuador, the center of the earth. And I try and do these things ahead of time so that you can go down and book something. And the SureX office said, remind them not to book ahead of time. Don't, because they'll come down here the night before and want to do something. And a lot of these places we're visiting, they have to bring the buses in from one of the big cities. They don't have all these buses just sitting there in this little town. So we do have to let them know in advance, and there's no way, we got enough people to put on another bus, but you can't get another bus. So to avoid your disappointment, go ahead and book them early, and we'll all be happy. So we're headed to Ecuador. Ecuador is slightly smaller than the U.S. state of Nevada, has a population of about 15 million people, 66th largest country in the world, 95% are Roman Catholic, at least in name and tradition. You'll find a lot of these areas, Roman Catholic is part of the heritage, part of the tradition, going back, of course, to the Spanish missionaries who came, but a lot of people are not really practicing except on holidays and special occasions. It is a republic. Its main industries are petroleum, agriculture, food processing, chemicals, and textiles. The original inhabitants here, the original indigenous people, were actually invaded by the Incas, and then the Incas introduced a system of organization and colonization, but they were often very fiercely resisted by the local indigenous tribes. 1531, Pizarro landed. What he found was conflict and disease that was destroying the Inca Empire. So the Europeans came along later with horses. Horses were animals that had never been seen in this part of the world before. They were used to fighting with llamas, and let along come the Europeans dressed in leather and armor and on these great big huge muscular horses, and the horses terrified the people. The Spanish colonized the area. They divided up the land by something called encomiendas, and that was where they established these great haciendas for the Spanish conquerors. Those eventually would become systems that would enslave the native Ecuadorians. It's ironic that the spark for independence in Ecuador actually came from their loyalty to Spain and the Spanish king. And after Napoleon invaded Spain, he deposed the original, the true Spanish king, and he put his brother on the throne. And the Spanish colonists over here in the Americas, based on their loyalty to the real Spanish king, began to have thoughts of independence and getting away from Spain. Ecuador declared its independence, and that independence was actually achieved by two armies, neither one from Ecuador. One of those armies was led by the Venezuelan, Simon Bolivar, and the other by an Argentine, Jose de Martin. So Ecuador has had, over the years, a tumultuous history. There have been occasional conflicts with their Peruvian neighbors. Ecuador, like many South American countries with their own currencies, have had to struggle with currency instability. For example, the rate of inflation in 1983 in Ecuador was 53%. That's tough to deal with. So after an economic crisis in 1999, Ecuador shifted to the US dollar in a policy called dollarization. And there are a number of countries here, some of which, they're all smaller, but some of which may surprise you, that actually use the US dollar as their currency. One of those is Panama. Panama has always used the US dollar, except for about a 2-week period when they tried printing their own money way back when, and the US said, nah, you don't do that. but we've always used the US dollar. We call it the bolivar, but it is in fact the US dollar. So what happened in Ecuador when they went to dollarization, it caused massive unrest in the lower classes because these people then struggled to convert their now useless sucres to US dollars. In the process, they lost wealth, while the upper classes, whose members had already moved their wealth into US dollars, gained wealth in turn. But at least for a lot of us who are used to using the US dollar, there's no need to change your money here. Just go forth and spend generously. Enjoy. The Andes Mountains, as the mountain chain that runs through Ecuador, up and down all of South America, runs through Ecuador. And the Amazon, which we'll talk about in a moment, actually also extends into Ecuador. Mount Chimborazo in Ecuador is the highest point on the planet, furthest from the center. Everest is the highest peak above sea level, because the Earth isn't a perfect sphere, just like me, it has an equatorial bulge. Chimborazo is the furthest point from the center of the Earth, and that is here in Ecuador. And Ecuador is the center of the Earth since it straddles the equator. And equator in Spanish is what? Ecuador. So that's where we get the name of the country. The Ecuadorial Monument is outside of Quito, and it is called the middle of the world. But you attended when I talked about Easter Island, you know that this may be the middle of the world, but the navel of the world is in Easter Island, not Ecuador. And we did establish, in case you always wondered, that the world has an outie navel and not an innie. But that's a picture of the navel of the world over in Easter Island. So I'm sure somebody's going to ask this, so I'm going to give you the answer. No, we don't have any tours up to Quito. It's 400 kilometers or 249 miles away, too far to go up independently. There is a train connection from Guayaquil up to Quito, and there are air connections as well. So if you decide to come back and spend more time in Ecuador, you may want to think about that. And many people from North America and Canada are coming back. There's a lot of interest by folks of retirement age from North America and Europe about moving abroad to areas of the world that can provide perhaps a better quality of life for less money. One of those places for us has been Panama, where I live, and I've talked about it. And possibly after we go through the canal, I'm going to set up a chat some afternoon along with some of the other expats that I've met on board, and we'll just have a chat, and you can ask questions about what it's like to do this and to live in another country. But Ecuador is one of those countries in which there's great interest of people who want to move and develop an expat lifestyle, particularly the area around Cuenca, which is up in the mountains. And let me just give a shameless plug for my book, which is on sale in the shops on board. If you've ever thought about an expat lifestyle, you've thought about living in another country, whether it's Panama, Costa Rica, Belize, Ecuador, someplace else, you'll want to pick up a copy of my book. And another reason you'll want to do that is there are only a half dozen left, and the big reason is I don't want to lug any of them home. So please snap them up. Now, many people wrongly assume that Quito is both the capital and largest city in Ecuador. Although Quito is the capital, Guayaquil is the largest city with 2.7 million people living in the metro area. It is, of course, also the major port, so being the big port, trade, business, agriculture, aquaculture. Aquaculture is very big down here, as you've already discovered, are the main industries. Guayaquil was founded in 1538 by a conquistador named Francisco de Orellana, whom we'll talk about in a minute. But because it was right on the coast, because it was an important port, it was always a good target for French and English pirates. They were always anxious to plunder any Spanish town along the coast. 1520, a group of civilians, mostly civilians, overwhelmed a Spanish garrison here in Guayaquil, and they declared the city's independence from Spain. That's long before The rest of the country was talking independence. 2 years later, as the movement for independence of the Spanish colonies was growing, then San Martin and Simon Bolivar met in Guayaquil to plan the independence of South America. Now, although we think mainly of Amazonia in relationship to Brazil, Amazonia spreads over 7 countries in South America: Colombia, Venezuela, Ecuador, Bolivia, Guyana, Suriname, and French Guiana. And the mighty Amazon River actually begins in Peru, but the fascinating connection here is that the Amazon was discovered by, drumroll, Francisco de Orellana, who also founded the city of Guayaquil. Orellana was born in Trujillo, Spain. He goes to Nicaragua when he's 17 years old. 22, he joins Pizarro in Peru, and he leads an expedition east of Quito into the interior in search of the legendary El Dorado. He never finds El Dorado, but he does reach what is today the Rio Negro, and eventually what we know today as the Amazon River. Being a young guy at the time, and maybe having been too long at sea without any female companionship, on the river he's attacked by fierce Indians. And these fierce Indians have long hair, they're smooth skinned, they don't have body hair, and they also have plucked eyebrows. Orellana mistakes them for women, and he thinks that they are women warriors. So when he goes back home and he describes these women warriors to the king is captivated by Orellana's tales of his journey, but especially by this idea of women warriors. And it reminds the king of a legendary tribe of women warriors called Amazons. These women only had sex once a year with male slaves for the sole purpose to preserve their group. And they would keep the female offspring, get rid of any male offspring. And they removed their right breast to more easily and accurately throw spears. So the king decided that these people were indeed women warriors, and that he would call the people Amazons, the land Amazonians, the land Amazon. And what originally was Rio de Orellana became the Amazon River. So Orellana made 2 voyages down the Amazon. The first was the remarkable one, and although he didn't find the legendary El Dorado, it did capture the attention of the king. It also, by the way, created somewhat of an international incident, because according to the Treaty of Tordesillas, which the Pope divided up the world and said this part is Spain, this part is Portugal, according to that treaty, most of the territory should be Spanish, while around the mouth of the river should belong to Portugal. Orellana did end up marrying a poor girl back in Spain, and then he took her, all her sisters, took all of them on his second voyage, again looking for El Dorado. He didn't find El Dorado, and that second voyage didn't end very well. Near starvation, they were attacked by the indigenous, and Orellana dies. His wife, however, manages to survive. She hooks up with another survivor, and they go off to retire in Panama. So there is a statue of Orellana. You'll see it today in the center of Guayaquil. So here's Ecuador, and down here is Guayaquil, and that's where we are headed. And you can see it has all the characteristics of being a nice protected harbor off the Pacific. Of course, Ecuador grows bananas, produces 6% of the world production, and exports some 8 million tons of bananas a year. I know this is fascinating to a lot of people, especially if you come from a cold climate. It's less fascinating to me because we always have a big thing of these bananas hanging in our garage. I was telling somebody at breakfast this morning that my dogs love bananas. They think bananas are the best treat. And we have a big stock of them in the garage. That's my breakfast buffet at home. But I take them and I give them to the dogs. And the dogs kind of put one paw here, and they neatly peel. Really, they just peel the banana off and then eat it. Unfortunately, they don't pick up the peels. Haven't been able to train them that. But this thing in the center, that's a banana flower. You've never seen one. And I think we have a tour that goes out to one of these places. But this is a huge thing. And as these big purple petals open, then it reveals a row of these tiny little fingers which are pollinated. Nowadays, bananas don't have seeds, but originally they did have seeds. And then each one of those little hand of flowers then becomes a hand of bananas. So it's a fun, fascinating thing to see. More than 2 million metric tons of cacao are produced every year in the tropical areas of Ecuador, mainly exported to Europe. When harvested, the cacao bean has this sticky, milky white covering. Like coffee, which takes a whole lot of work before it ends up in Starbucks, cacao takes a whole lot of work before it ends up in your box of See's candy. How many of you know See's candy? Isn't it the best candy? It really is. If you're coming to Panama, you want to bring me a present, bring me a box of See's candy. Oh, now why did you have to tell me that? Anybody else have a hidden stash in their cabin? It's great stuff. It's so great that Warren Buffett bought the company. And you know why he bought the company? He didn't want a thing changed. Really, he liked the candy. It's great candy. Sometimes you'll see it in airports. Usually it's more or less only on the west coast of the U.S., but it's good stuff. So cacao. The other thing is roses, and those roses you buy in the supermarket probably left Ecuador 2 days earlier on an airplane, and they cost you generally less than $20 a dozen. The region's topography and location along the equator make it one of the best areas in the world to grow flowers. Ecuador is the world's third largest exporter of cut flowers, 73% of which are roses. It's an industry that employs 103,000 people and is an $837 million business. So I think we have another tour that's going up to some of these flower farms. And it's not just roses, but all kinds of tropical plants and flowers. Some of you are going to visit one of these, one of the largest orchid farms in the world. And the other thing that they really do produce, and actually they're well known for, and I'm sorry to disillusion you, but the famous Panama, what? Oh, that was a sneeze. Oh, I thought somebody was objecting. The famous Panama hats did not originate in Panama, but actually in Ecuador. These are not the cheap Chinese knockoffs that sell for $10 to $25 to tourists, depending on how gullible the tourist is. The real hats will start at about $350 and go on up. And the real hats are made of palm fibers that are taken off the trees, they're stripped off, and then they're boiled like this to become pliable. The hats are then hand woven over a mold and allowed to dry. This is a very time-consuming process. It requires great skill and a very, very strong back, because that's how they do it. They bend over, they do it by hand. The best hats are made in a little town called Monte Cristi, which is not in Guayaquil. I know we're offering a tour to a Panama hat showroom, where many of those exceptional hats are offered for sale. Unfortunately, we don't have the tour that goes up to Monte Cristi. But if you did go up to Monte Cristi, you would see the actual factory where the hats are made in this hat maker's simple home. This is the hat maker's home. This is where the hats are made. And believe me, these folks are not making $300 to $600 and up per hat. But it is a very fascinating process and a fascinating history. Those cheap hats are actually made in China, not of actual palm, but of paper straw. And the machines there can knock out 10,000 hats per day. So it's a big difference. You want a real Panama hat, you're going to have to pay for it. Now, why are they called Panama hats? Well, during the early days of construction of the Panama Canal, there was a hat maker from Ecuador who had a surplus supply of these hats and decided, well, the ideal place to sell them would be to all these people working, digging out in the hot sun of the Panama Canal. So he went up to Panama to unload his hats. Then when Teddy Roosevelt became the first president in U.S. history to leave the U.S. while in office, he went to the Panama Canal construction site and he wore a Panama hat in the presidential photo op, and the rest is history. So that's why it's now called a Panama hat. So Panama hats, the real deal, are the thing to wear and the thing to be seen in. So they're worn by everybody who is anybody. You just never know who you're going to see wearing a real Panama hat. And apparently the kid at the bottom decided to give up on Panama hats and smoking Panama Red and went on to be the President of the United States. But anyhow. That's true. That's an actual picture. So one of my favorite dishes down here is ceviche. Unfortunately, I'm allergic to shellfish, but you can make ceviche at home. If you've got a good supply of really good limes, you can take any fish and develop your own recipe, and it really is an easy thing to do at home, and it's a very fun, light, especially on a hot day, to have ceviche for dinner is great. So here's Ecuador. We're headed to Guayaquil. One of the interesting parts of Ecuador is actually way out there in the Pacific, and that is the Galapagos Islands. Very protected national park. Now, we talked a little bit about this in passing. We talked about Charles Darwin. There are only a few small expedition type ships that are permitted in the Galapagos. We're never going to be able to go there. National Geographic is one. There's a couple other ones. My daughter, who's an environmental educator, was actually selected last year to be one of 30 National Geographic fellows. And part of that thing, they sent her to the Galapagos. And on her way home, she stopped to see us in Panama, and she shared her experiences and her pictures. And it is definitely something on my bucket list. Unfortunately, everybody who lectures on those ships by law has to be from the Galapagos Islands. So I'm never going to get that gig. But how many of you have been to Galapagos? Great place? Yes, wonderful place. So I hope you all get to go there. So Guayaquil was founded in 1538. It grew into a coastal economy of shipping and trade, became the largest shipbuilding center on the west coast of South America. Periodically, as I said, it was the target of English and French pirates. The city was destroyed several times by fire, incessantly plagued by either yellow fever or malaria. Today, it's Ecuador's largest city. It's an economic center and a provincial capital with a metropolitan population of over 4.5 million. It's the country's main port, the center of fishing and manufacturing industries. The port handles most of Ecuador's exports and imports and half of its exports. Now, this is a big commercial port. So again, it's not a port where you can walk safely around. There should be a shuttle from the ship to the cathedral. The details of that will be in the Princess Patter. Taxis here are not always reliable, as there have been some taxi kidnappings. So if you do choose a cab, be sure you take marked taxis. Some have meters, but like anywhere in the world, the meter is usually broken for tourists. And just agree on your price beforehand. Don't have to worry about currency because it's going to be in US dollars. If somebody wants to give you change and they pull out a strange looking bill and say, yeah, but that's our currency, you know that that bill came from the old bills and is worthless, right? So you give them a 20, they're going to give you change in US dollars, okay? So just be aware of that, and be aware that every vehicle painted yellow is not necessarily a cab. So just be a little bit extra cautious. You all got that note in your cabin last night, and a number of people have asked me about that. You always need to be cautious, but some of these areas you need to be more cautious. Those of you that went to Rio, no, Rio's a great city, but you have to be cautious. And so we're hitting some of those places over here as well. The northern section of this new waterfront promenade boasts plazas, water fountains. There is an antique Ecuadorian train there. A big playground. There's also an IMAX theater, an Inca museum that's near the theater, and this is one of the most popular areas in town, and generally it's pretty safe for tourists. The Malecón central area is home to the historic Civic Plaza that features these grand sculptures and the Moorish clock tower. The plaza's crown jewel is La Rotonda, which is a spectacular semicircular monument commemorating the meeting of two Latin American liberators, Simon Bolivar and San Martin, who came here to Guayaquil to plan the liberation of the South America. There is an antique train display in the Malecón. There is train service, as I mentioned, to Quito. And there's also a tourist train. It's called a train cruise that takes you on a 4-day tour, stopping and staying in hotels along the way. If you're coming back to Ecuador, if you'd like to explore this area more, something you may want to look into. Located at the foot of Santa Ana Hill, where the city began, Barrio Las Penas is an area of the city with a coastal colonial architecture. It was destroyed and reconstructed several times as a result of fires, particularly the Great Fire of 1896. It has recently been restored, and it is charmingly historic, and some of you may want to go there. Parque Seminario, sometimes just referred to by the old name of Parque Boulevard, is at the front of the Guayaquil Cathedral, and the statue of Simon Bolivar is there. What gets more attention than the statue are actually some of the local residents. They are the iguanas that make occasional appearances out of the trees and shrubs and feel very at home in the park. So he was here before you were, so don't try and get that seat. The Guayaquil Cathedral is just off that square. It's well worth visiting with its magnificent soaring Gothic interior. There's an amazing variety of locally produced clothing, fabric, jewelry, ceramics, purses, and bags available at the Mercado Artesano. This is a giant maze of all these little shops selling all kinds of craft and souvenir items. Big plus here is that the prices are going to be in dollars. You don't have to worry about converting that. I actually have found, I think I'm not a big shopper, but I actually find shopping in Ecuador to be maybe more interesting than some of the other places we've been. So you might want to check that out. These colorful handmade hammocks are actually a lot stronger than they look, and they're a great souvenir or gift to take home. A lot of us associate hammocks with a thing that has a piece of wood at the end and is stretched out, and we look at these things, but these are the hammocks that people here use. And you just hang it up any two places, and you sit in it. And if it looks like it's impossible to get out, actually it's very easy to get out. You just reach up ahead, you grab a bunch of it, and you step out. So they're very colorful, and you'll see them all over this area. Now, this is not Inca porn, folks, but actually these are copies of ancient fertility symbols. And they have them for sale here. It's certainly a conversation starter for your coffee table or office desk back home. So you can buy them here, folks. Now, I just want to kind of reiterate, I don't work for Shorex. I do work with them. Some of you prefer the advantages of taking a ship's tour, which is wonderful. You can sit back, relax. You don't have to worry about anything. They take care of everything. The ship isn't going to leave without you. And it's, in many cases, the most efficient way to invest your limited time in a port, and the most cost-effective. But a lot of you want to do your own thing. You want to book your own tour, and that's fine. Do the research, and you know, if you've been in a place and you're not quite sure, well, what's a good place when you get off the ship, often there will be some kind of kiosk from the local tourist board. They can make recommendations. There are sites on the internet. One of them's Cruise Critic. Who's member Cruise Critic here? Yeah, a lot of people are. I am. Richard in Panama. But you know, sometimes you go on Cruise Critic and you can look under the port and you can find recommendations, names of people from other cruises have used and been satisfied with. So it's really up to you. But if you are coming with the ship tour, and in many ways I think it's the most cost-effective and the best use of time, least amount of hassle, don't wait till the last minute. Get in there and do it now. A couple hints here: informal attire is fine, but no bathing suits without cover-ups. Be respectful when you go to churches. Generally, Women might want to take along a shawl to put over their head and shoulders. No short shorts, just forget that. Many churches don't want shorts at all, men or women. Leave your valuables and jewelry on board. We're very impressed with the family jewels, but don't take them off the ship. Use caution, be aware of your surroundings, be street smart. That's the most important thing anywhere in the world. If you walk down the street, people who live on the street, who are familiar with street culture, they can spot you a mile away. And it's not just dress, it's kind of attitude. If you look like you're afraid, they know it and they'll prey on you. So be street smart. Watch for uneven sidewalks. They're everywhere down here. So, don't spoil your vacation by breaking your ankle or something like that. Use only bottled water in sealed containers. That sealed container bit is important. I remember once we were up in, I guess we were in Cambodia, and the kids all wanted our water bottles, and it took me a while to figure out why they wanted our old plastic water bottles. And then I realized they would fill them with water, any old water, and then sell them back to the tourists. So sealed, and you look for major brands. Most bottled water in the world is going to be Nestle or Coke or Pepsi or one of those big names. So for those of you who joined us along the way, we need to have the talk. I've watched some of you in the back of the bus, and I know you don't need that talk. You've already figured all that stuff out. But this is the talk about crossing the line. The equator is an imaginary line on the Earth's surface, approximately equidistant from north and south poles, dividing the northern and southern hemispheres. The equator is where the Earth is widest and where the sun is directly overhead at the equator on the two equinoxes. And let me just say that the fact that we're near the equator and on the equator in a couple days or whenever, the sun is much stronger here. And I'll mention this again before we go through the canal. Panama, for the past week or so, 2 weeks, has had the highest level, the highest warning of UV problems, because the UV index was just off the chart, way up in the red thing. So please, if you go out, use sunscreen, wear a hat, just be cautious of the sun when we're around the equator. The two tropics are the lines where the sun is directly overhead at noon on the two solstices near June and December 21st, marking the change of seasons. The area bounded by the tropics are known as the tropics. They do not experience the seasonal variations or variation in climate because the sun is always high in the sky, which means the weather is always the weather that I like. Latitude, represented by the Greek letter pi, gives the location north or south of the equator. It's an angular measurement in degrees from 0 at the equator to 90 at the poles, approximately the angle between straight up at the surface or zenith and the sun at an equinox. Historically, mariners calculated latitude in the northern hemispheres by sighting the North Star with a sextant. Hipparchus was a Greek astronomer, geographer, mathematician, one of the greatest astronomers of antiquity. He had developed a quantitative and accurate method for position of the sun and moon, and suggested the grid lines of longitude and latitude. Eratosthenes was a later Greek mathematician and astronomer who measured the circumference of the Earth accurate to within 300 miles. The Greeks could find latitude quite easily by measuring the sun's angle at noon relative to the equator. Accurately determining longitude would prove much harder, possible to be off by 30 or 300 miles. That's a big difference. So Parliament offered a £4.5 million award to anyone who could come up with a way to determine longitude. And it was a self-educated English clockmaker named John Harrison who invented the marine chronometer in 1730, which was a clock that would work reliably at sea, not using the traditional pendulum. Knowing the time while making an altitude measurement to the sun provided the critical data for a ship's position east to west. This is why we have the old maritime tradition of the voice from the bridge. The ship's position was determined at noon when the sun was at its zenith and entered into the ship's log. As communication developed, that position was then reported to the home office. Today it's reported to you, not as originally by megaphone, but by the officer of the watch from the bridge. This today, you can go online and you can find the position, the immediate position of where our ship is in the world or any other ship or yacht in the world. Just go online and you enter in the name of the ship and you can find where it is. Poseidon was the Greek god of the sea, and as the earth shaker, the god of earthquakes. In Roman mythology, he became Neptune. When he was angered, he struck the ground with his trident, resulting in storms, earthquakes, drownings, and shipwrecks. Naturally, he needs to be appeased by sailors who would pray to Neptune for smooth seas and safe voyages. No one would want to anger King Neptune, except for ignorant and inexperienced pollywogs. And therein lies the problem, because there are masses of ignorant, inexperienced, uneducated pollywogs, some of whom joined recently, who dare to cross the equator for the first time, thus offending King Neptune. And so mariners developed the tradition of crossing the line, where the uninitiated pollywogs are called before King Neptune and subjected to a variety of hazing. In the 19th century, some of these initiations were very violent. Now, with hazing forbidden, more or less, it is a little more tame. So knowing that you would want to know and need to know, I have asked around. I asked the captain what was going to happen, and he said no one knows until the crossing day when King Neptune comes forth from the deep. So I asked Homeland Security. And they answered, in the national interest, the Department of Homeland Security does not permit us to discuss. So I asked the Prince's Home Office, and they said, Prince's only does what is in the best interest of our guest. A statement from the captain will be forthcoming. So I asked the cruise director, and Bob said, we can tell you, but then we will have to kill you. So who knows? But I can tell you that Princess takes this very seriously. We're very concerned for you, and on Princess, your safety and enjoyment are our primary concern. In any unforeseen emergency, our medical team will be standing by to offer their assistance. So just so you understand the terminology, a pollywog or wog is uninitiated. A shellback has crossed the equator. A golden shellback has crossed the equator at the international date line, and an emerald shellback, this sounds like Amway, an emerald shellback or royal diamond shellback has crossed at the prime meridian, 0 degrees east and 0 degrees on the equator. So very interesting. You can figure out who you are. I don't want to embarrass anybody. But understand that whatever happens, it's all in good, clean fun. So you can watch your Princess Patter for the details. Just out of curiosity, how many of you are pollywogs and have never crossed? Ooh. May the force be with you. Good, 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 good. Okay, so coming up, I have a double feature for you, which will cover both Punta Arenas, Costa Rica, and Santa Marta, Colombia. I realize they're kind of far distant, and in between we have this little thing called the Panama Canal. And the reason why I'm doing these together is because there are a number of different talks that relate to the Panama Canal. So guys, thank you very much, and I invite you to come back this afternoon at 2 p.m. when Steve Noble will share really a great video that he's put together about Machu Picchu. He's been up there a couple times, he's filmed it a lot, so please do come back for that, 2 p.m. this afternoon. Thank you very much, guys.